The night air in Flagstaff had a quiet sort of sharpness, the kind that makes your breath feel colder than it actually is. I had just turned off the lights in my office and was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to whistle. It was the end of a long day. Emails, budget approvals, vendor disputes. I had been looking forward to tea, a fleece blanket, and maybe something brainless on TV. Nothing dramatic, nothing heavy, just quiet. My phone buzzed across the counter, breaking the silence with a sharp vibration that made me jump. It was a voicemail, not a call. From Nancy, the woman who lived in the cabin down the hill. We weren't close, but we exchanged holiday cookies and waved when passing on the dirt road. Her voice in the message was steady, but something about her tone made my stomach coil. Hey Vespera, sorry to bother you so late. Just thought I should check. Did you rent the place out or sell it? I saw a moving van pull in. Couple guys unloading furniture. I figured I'd ask before I called the sheriff. I hit replay 3 times. There must have been a mistake. Or a prank. Maybe they had the wrong address. Still, I found myself pulling a sweatshirt over my pajamas, grabbing my keys, and driving down the winding forest road with my headlights slicing through the trees. The whole drive, I kept thinking, maybe it's just something explainable, something benign. Maybe I left a window open and the lights are reflecting weirdly. Maybe. But no amount of hopeful maybes could have prepared me for what I saw when I pulled into the driveway. 2 men in their early 40s in matching polos were unloading a beige couch from a rental truck. One of them looked up, surprised but not alarmed, the way someone might look at a neighbor interrupting a planned delivery. Evening, I said, stepping out slowly. Can I ask what you're doing? The man holding the back end of the couch nodded politely. Moving in. Said you'd left a few things behind, but it should be fine. I didn't sell this house, I replied, my voice tightening. I live here. This is my property. Now both of them froze. The taller one stepped forward, pulling his phone from his pocket. We were told it was fine. The woman said she was the homeowner's mother. My heart dropped. What's her name? Morvena. Said she was handling the transfer. I called the police, not out of fear, there was no threat, but because suddenly I felt like a stranger in my own space. The dispatcher was kind but brief. According to our system, ma'am, that property is currently flagged as in transfer status. If there's a dispute, you'll need to go through your title office or a lawyer. I stood there while the 2 men put the couch back into the truck. They didn't ask questions. They just looked embarrassed and confused, as if they'd been sold a promise and realized they'd walked into something personal. After they left, I walked around the porch with my flashlight. No broken locks, no vandalism, just unfamiliar footprints in the snow. I sat on the porch step, letting the cold soak through my leggings while my thoughts unraveled. Did I forget a document? Was there some clause in my mortgage paperwork? Had I ever signed something without reading it properly? I prided myself on being organized, precise. I had spreadsheets for grocery budgets and digital folders labeled by year. There was no way I missed something. But a quiet voice inside me, one I didn't like to acknowledge, whispered a question I didn't want to ask. What if this wasn't a mistake? I hadn't talked to my mother in a week. Our last conversation was civil, but clipped. She'd asked if I was still holding on to that mountain place. I'd said, yes, why wouldn't I be? And she'd chuckled in that dismissive way that made me feel 12 again. I drove back to my apartment in town just before sunrise, eyes dry but head pounding. I didn't sleep, couldn't. I stared at the ceiling, playing every conversation over and over. The next afternoon, after microwaving coffee I never finished, I drove back up to the cabin, hoping to shake off the sense of invasion. But as I turned onto the gravel road, I saw it, planted firmly in front of my home, a red and white sign, sold. Not for sale, not pending, sold. My chest constricted. I parked and marched straight to the sign, fingers trembling as I yanked it out of the frozen soil. Beneath the plastic, there was a realty company's name and a phone number. I called it. The assistant picked up, chipper and oblivious. Yes, that property closed escrow a few days ago. The seller was listed as Morvena G. That's my mother, I cut in. A pause. Oh, well, she said it was a family transfer. Everything looked in order on our end. I thanked her and hung up. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I went inside, opened my laptop, and pulled up the county assessor's site. I typed in my parcel number with methodical care. My hands were cold, my fingers stiff, but my brain was sharper than it had been in days. They wouldn't, I whispered to the empty room. The page loaded. I stared at the ownership history, then whispered again, louder this time. They wouldn't. Would they? The following morning, the cold light through my bedroom window did nothing to warm the knot in my stomach. I hadn't slept, not really. I spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, mind spiraling through legal possibilities, emotional wounds, and practical questions. Was my name still on the deed? Could she even do that legally? What else had they touched? At exactly 7:34 a.m., my phone lit up. Mom, on the screen. I let it ring twice before answering. "Hi, sweetheart," Morvena said, that polished, syrupy tone she used when she wanted to manipulate without sounding like she was doing it. "I heard you were at the cabin last night. Everything okay?" I leaned against the kitchen counter, holding the phone away from my face for a moment, taking a slow breath. "Interesting," I said, cool and clipped. "Because when I arrived, there were strangers unloading furniture into my house." Silence. Not even a gasp or feigned confusion. Just space. I filled it. "So I'm going to ask once, Mom. Why is my house being sold under your name?" Still nothing for a beat too long. Then she let out a soft chuckle. "Oh, Vespera, you're single, honey. That house just... It's not being used wisely. It's not like you're raising a family there." I blinked, stunned. Not even denial. Just justification. "You're telling me you committed fraud because I'm not married?" "I didn't commit anything," she said evenly. "We're family. Azura just got out of a devastating divorce. She needs space, healing. You work all the time. You don't even go up there anymore." My throat tightened, but I didn't raise my voice. "That house is mine. Paid off. In my name. I bought it with my savings. I never gave anyone permission." "Honey," she interrupted, "we've always helped each other in this family. This is no different. Being unmarried doesn't mean being unworthy," I shot back. "You don't get to decide what I need." There was a long pause, then a sigh. "I can't talk when you're emotional," she said, and hung up. That phrase, "when you're emotional," was her favorite shield. Every time she wanted to shut me down, she'd toss it like a smoke bomb. I stared at the blank screen, then the text icon blinked. One new message. Azura. "Hey, just heard from Mom you're upset. I didn't know she was handling stuff." I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because I could practically hear her fake surprise. I remembered her asking me, just a few weeks ago, "Hey, is that cabin still yours?" while flipping through old Instagram posts. She had known. I typed a response. "You knew." She didn't reply. I deleted the thread. I stood there in the middle of my home, my real home in town, feeling like the air had been sucked out of the room. I grabbed my laptop and sat at the dining table, opening a new folder on my desktop. Evidence, I named it. Screenshots, voicemails, texts, a copy of my deed. I began dragging everything in, one by one. I wasn't sure what I would need yet, but I knew I needed something. I wasn't going to be the woman who found out too late. Not this time. Around mid-morning, I tried calling my father. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. The message I left was brief. "If you want to talk to your daughter, now is the time, before this gets uglier than it already is." He didn't call back. By noon, I had gone from numb to surgical. I didn't feel betrayed so much as erased. This wasn't just about money or real estate. It was about being rendered invisible by the very people who should have protected me. They didn't just take something that belonged to me. They decided I didn't exist enough to ask. Later that evening, when the light had turned gold and long across the walls, I called Solène. She answered on the second ring. "Jesus," she said without a greeting. "I saw Azura's post. She's talking about retreating into nature to heal. Is that your damn cabin?" "Yep," I said, voice flat. Solène let out a hiss. "What the hell is going on?" "They transferred the house without my consent. Said I don't need it because I'm single." She didn't respond for a beat. Then, that's not family dynamics. That's financial abuse. I felt my jaw tighten. That's what I thought. I've seen this before. When you're the one who doesn't need help, they start seeing you as a resource, not a person. Her words landed like bricks. They didn't just sell a house, I said slowly. They made a decision that I didn't matter. Solen exhaled hard. So, what now? I turned back to my computer. The folder was already filling up. This is war, I said softly. I just didn't know I was drafted. The morning after my call with Solen, I drove back to the cabin, the one that apparently no longer belonged to me, at least not on paper. The sky was still dull with the kind of gray that makes everything feel heavier. I pulled into the drive slower than usual, almost like I was arriving at someone else's home, which, in a way, I was. Unlocking the door, I stepped inside cautiously. The air didn't feel like mine anymore. There was no scent of my cinnamon candle, no hum of the heater kicking on the way I'd programmed it. Something was off. I moved through the living room slowly, my fingertips brushing over the surfaces like I was walking through a museum of my own life. The throw blanket I always kept on the guest chair, it had been folded differently. The framed photo of me and my old college roommates, gone. In its place, a generic mountain print I'd never seen before. Then it hit me. A memory, almost insignificant at the time, now thudding like a dropped stone. Weeks ago, Azura had been scrolling through my Instagram and stopped on a photo of the cabin bathed in snowlight. She'd asked, "If you ever give that place up, can I decorate it?" I'd laughed, thought she was being lighthearted. "You don't even like the cold," I'd said. She'd smiled. "Yeah, but I like the idea of space, of peace." Back then, I thought it was a joke. Now I realized it was groundwork. Later that afternoon, I messaged Lyris, my former sister-in-law, the one who disappeared from family gatherings after her divorce from my brother. I hadn't spoken to her in almost 2 years. But something in my gut told me I needed her voice now, not for comfort, for clarity. She agreed to meet at a coffee shop off the main road. I arrived early, took a seat near the window, and waited. When she walked in, she looked older, more tired, but her eyes lit up when they found mine. "No small talk," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "I know why you called." I didn't speak, just watched her, waited. They did the same thing to me, Vespera, right after the divorce. First it was subtle, changing the family stories, rewriting who paid for what, who supported who. Then they erased me completely, told people I was unstable, bitter, unpredictable. My throat tightened. "That sounds familiar." "They protect one child," she said flatly. "The rest are disposable. You're not the first. You won't be the last." I leaned back, absorbing her words. I thought I was just overreacting. She shook her head. "No, you're the target this year. That's all." We talked for almost an hour. About patterns, about how our family believed silence was noble and boundaries were betrayal. And when she left, I didn't feel better, but I did feel less alone. Back at the cabin, I pulled up Azura's social media page. I hadn't done it in days, afraid of what I might see. But I needed to know how deep this went. And there it was. And a photo, one I remembered taking, reposted to her page. It was my family standing in front of the fireplace at our childhood home. Morvena, Thane, Azura, even their dog. But not me. The caption? "Grateful to be surrounded by love and support." I stared at it for what felt like hours. It wasn't just that I'd been cropped out. It was that no one even noticed. "You know what erasure feels like?" I whispered aloud to no one. "It's not shouting, it's silence." That night, I started building a file, a digital archive of everything they'd done, texts, emails, screenshots of real estate listings, even the Instagram photo. I wasn't waiting for them to come clean. I was preparing. "They're betting I'll stay quiet," I murmured as I created folders labeled property theft, financial manipulation, media evidence. Because that's what they'd always counted on, that I wouldn't make noise, that I'd keep the peace. But I wasn't raised to be quiet. I was raised to be polite. That's different. The next morning, as I was finishing my coffee, the mail carrier left a padded envelope at the door. No return address. Just my name. I opened it cautiously. Inside was a stack of documents. A finalized deed transfer, stamped and notarized. The cabin had officially been transferred to a family trust, with Morvena listed as the primary handler. At the bottom of the final page, in careful handwriting, was a short note. "Thanks for making this easy." I stared at the words until they blurred, then refocused. My fingers didn't tremble. My lips didn't quiver. Not anymore. "They think I'm done," I said, sliding the document into my folder. Then I whispered, this time with weight behind every syllable. "They've just started a storm." I sat in my car outside the county courthouse, my phone pressed to my ear, waiting to see if he'd pick up. It had been 3 attempts in the last 7 days. No texts returned, no calls acknowledged. Just silence. But this time, he answered. "Ves," my father said. His voice was flat, distant, like he was reading from a script. "This isn't the time to get emotional." I stared through the windshield, watching a couple argue quietly in the parking lot across the way. Their arms moved, not quite in sync. At least they were fighting together. I didn't even get that luxury. "What's done is done," he added. I swallowed, careful to keep my tone steady. "What's done is criminal." Click. That was it. He hung up. I didn't curse. I didn't scream. I just stared at the call log, my own name highlighted beneath his, like a shadow of a daughter he didn't want to see anymore. I put my phone in the cup holder, shifted gears, and drove across the street to the records office. Inside, the air conditioning was too strong. The receptionist, a young woman with purple glasses and chipper energy that clashed violently with my mood, asked for my ID. "I'm here to check ownership filings on parcel 134E. My name's on the current deed." She typed something quickly. "Looks like the property was recently transferred. Processed under a family restructuring agreement. That's common in trusts." I leaned over the counter. "Who signed it?" Her eyes flicked to the screen, then back to me. "Morvena Greer. My mother." I took a breath through my nose. "And me?" She hesitated, then turned the screen slightly. "It shows both names here. Your name's on the transfer agreement." I stood there, blinking. "I never signed anything. I want a printed copy." She nodded quickly. "Of course." 10 minutes later, I walked out with a manila envelope in my hand and a hurricane building in my chest. On the steps outside, my phone buzzed. A message from Bryn, a friend of Azura's I hadn't spoken to in over a year. "Hey, hope you're doing okay. Azura mentioned moving into your cabin. Said you offered. Just seemed weird to me. She's already got a designer coming by next week." My fingers clenched. I replied, "I didn't offer." She knows I didn't. No response. Of course. I sat in the driver's seat again, staring at the papers. My name, my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. It was a sad imitation of something I'd written once on a Christmas card envelope. They must have copied it, scanned it, used it. I thought about all the times I had given them access to my paperwork during hospital visits, when they said it was just in case or for safekeeping. I'd trusted them. I'd trusted the people who raised me not to weaponize my trust. That trust was dead now. Sometimes the family you're born into isn't the one that deserves your loyalty. I'd seen that quote on a bumper sticker once, and at the time I thought it was melodramatic. Now, it felt like scripture. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a mutiny, and I was the one they'd voted off the ship. The sun had already started to dip when I pulled into their driveway later that day. I hadn't planned to come, but holding those forged papers in my hand made it impossible to ignore. Morvena opened the door in pearls and a smug smile. "We're having lunch. You're welcome to join." She moved aside like she was letting me into a damn holiday brunch. The scent of roasted chicken filled the air, clashing with the bitter taste rising in my throat. I didn't step inside. "I'm not here to eat," I said calmly. "I'd like to see the paper you claim I signed." Her smile faded just enough to reveal the flicker of tension beneath. "Vespera, I really don't think this tone is helpful." "Helpful to who?" I asked. "To you. To Azura? To the story you're spinning?" She crossed her arms. If you keep making noise about this, we'll all suffer, especially Azura. There it was, the shift, the threat wrapped in faux concern. I pulled a thin envelope from my purse, bold letters across the front. Void. I held it up. Let me be very clear. I'm not the one who's going to suffer. I placed it gently on the entry table beside her scented candles and her curated stack of real estate magazines. She didn't move, didn't reach for it, just stared, lips pressed into a tight line. I turned and walked away, heels clicking against their marble foyer like punctuation. I didn't look back. The invitation came in the form of a text from Morvena. Family lunch on Saturday. Let's talk everything through. Bring an open heart. I nearly dropped my phone from laughing. Open heart? The same heart they'd steamrolled last month? Still, a small part of me wanted to believe there was room for repair, even if logic screamed otherwise. That Saturday, I pulled into their Scottsdale driveway at noon sharp. The house looked exactly like it always had. Manicured lawn, wreath on the door 6 months too early, and an invisible cloud of control hovering over the property. My mother greeted me with a rehearsed smile. Thane sat in the living room, flipping through the newspaper like a man with no sins. Azura, predictably, was perched at the dining table with her legs crossed and phone in hand, tapping away like she was too busy healing to look up. We're all here because we love each other, Morvena began the moment I stepped into the room. But love comes with responsibility. I said nothing. I just looked at the perfectly arranged table, roses in a vase, cookies laid out in symmetrical lines, a pitcher of iced tea sweating politely. It looked like peace, but it felt like an ambush. Morvena stood and moved to her laptop on the sideboard. I just want to show you something, sweetheart, for transparency. She opened a spreadsheet titled Support Given to Vespera. Each row was a gut punch, high school tuition, orthodontist payments, a $43 charge labeled Lunch 2003. Even the gas she'd paid for during my move to college. We didn't raise you to hoard, she said, turning the screen toward me. We raised you to understand value, to give back. I stared at the list, a lifetime of receipts, organized like ammunition. You raised me to believe love had a price tag, I said quietly. I just never thought it would be itemized. Azura looked up then. Her smirk wasn't even hidden. It's just a record, Vess. Don't take it personally. Oh, I'm not. I'm just impressed at the detail. You even tracked the $7 I borrowed from Dad in '07. Thane cleared his throat. It's not about the money. It's about acknowledgement. No, I replied, standing straighter. It's about control. And now you're pissed because I'm not playing along. Before Morvena could respond, I pulled my phone from my pocket. I actually brought something too, I said, opening my email and tapping on a message I had forwarded to myself. It was an email from her to Azura. I hadn't been meant to see it. My address had been accidentally included on a CC. I read it aloud. Once the transfer is in place, ease her into it. Don't confront. She doesn't check legal docs thoroughly. Just keep her feeling loved. The room went dead silent. I looked up. Still want to talk about love? Morvena's face hardened. That was taken out of context. Right, I said, folding my arms. Because there's a perfectly warm and fuzzy way to say, keep her feeling loved while stealing from her. Azura leaned forward. You're overreacting, as usual. I ignored her. This isn't about me being single. It's about me being silent. And I'm not anymore. I turned, picked up my purse, and walked toward the door. No shouting, no slamming. Just the sound of my heels against tile, slicing through their tension like a blade. I didn't wait for them to follow. That night, after driving back to the cabin, I called Zephyrine, my attorney. We reviewed the deed, the trust document, and the forged signature again. I want a cease and desist drafted, I said, pacing my living room. Zephyrine's voice was calm, but focused. We'll send it first thing Monday. Then I called a locksmith. By 9 p.m., every lock in the cabin had been replaced. Deadbolts, window latches, everything. Even the keypad on the garage door got a new code. The man handed me the new set of keys. Whoever had access before won't get in now, he said with a grin. I nodded. Good. That's exactly the point. Before going to bed, I sat at my desk and opened a blank document titled Timeline of Violations. As I typed, I whispered, if they wanted a war built on paperwork, they forgot I know how to file. The locksmith arrived a little past noon. I had already been pacing the cabin for an hour, half from nerves, half from impatience. The previous night had drained me, but something about waking up and touching the doorknob, knowing anyone who once had access could still walk right in, lit a fire under me. I needed control back, and today was about reclaiming what was mine, inch by inch, lock by lock. Everything, right? He asked, adjusting his belt, eyes scanning the front door. Every door, every window, even the garage, I said without hesitation. I want a new code for the keypad, and no trace of the old one. He nodded, no questions asked. I appreciated that. As he worked, I stood by the kitchen counter, phone in hand, speaking with Zephyrine. Her voice, calm and calculating, had become something of a lifeline in the chaos. Paper trails, Vespera. Every lock, every letter, you're not just protecting your home, you're building your case. I watched the man drill out the old deadbolt and said, they think I'm just lashing out, but I'm documenting every step. Zephyrine hummed on the line. Good. We'll get the cease and desist filed today. You'll sign the draft electronically. I'm ready, I said, and I meant it. Once the locksmith finished, he handed me a small bag with spare keys and codes. Should be good now, he said. No one's getting in unless you want them to. I thanked him, locked the door behind him, and stood there in the quiet. I didn't feel safe yet, but I felt sealed. That counted for something. Later that evening, while going through my inbox, Zephyrine's name popped up with the subject line, POA Signature Discovery. Urgent. I opened it immediately. Attached were documents tied to a family property restructuring filed weeks ago. The disturbing part wasn't the timing, it was the method. They had used a medical power of attorney, dated 3 years prior, during my gallbladder surgery. I was groggy, out of it, trusting. My father had signed the consent paperwork because I couldn't. At the time, it felt like love. Now I understood it as strategy. I called Zephyrine. They waited, they planned, and they used my own vulnerability as a weapon, I said, pacing. That's how they did it, right? She confirmed it. The misuse of a healthcare power of attorney, especially for unrelated property transfers, falls under fraud. The word hit me like a slap. I didn't need it to feel real, but it added a layer of clarity I hadn't let myself claim. They always said family protects family, I muttered. Turns out, family preys on the one who doesn't scream loud enough. The next morning, I walked into my bank. The manager recognized me, small-town perks, and greeted me warmly. I need to revoke all access tied to my parents, I said. Banking, savings, shared signatures, anything automated. Kill it all. He blinked, stunned. Is everything okay? Not even remotely, I said, sliding over my ID. But it will be. It wasn't just the bank. I went to my insurance agent, my accountant, even the notary who once handled my business registrations. Every tie they had to my financial landscape, I severed it. And finally, I logged into my mortgage app and canceled the monthly auto transfer I'd been making for the last 2 years. That had been my gift to them, helping them stay afloat, covering the difference on their over-leveraged home. No more. They were used to me fixing things, I whispered in the car. They never thought I'd cut the rope. Back at the cabin, I updated my file, screenshots of the POA, the email from Zephyrine, bank confirmations of revoked access, and signed legal notices. I labeled them, time-stamped them, built my case with the precision of a woman trained to notice patterns. Because that was my job. Auditing, following paper trails, finding holes. They played a long game, I said, clicking save. But they forgot. I read the rules before I play. I thought about the quote Zephyrine had shared when we first spoke. Revenge is not in my plan. Justice is. Michelle Obama. I hadn't appreciated it fully then. Now, it felt tattooed behind my eyes. That night, I curled into bed, exhausted but resolute. The cabin felt different now, not because of the locks, but because of the boundary they represented. Around midnight, my phone pinged. Motion alert. I sat up, heart steady. The footage loaded slowly on the app, and then, there it was, a figure at the back door. Hooded, slow, familiar. Thane. He was testing the handle. My fingers moved before my brain caught up. Text to Zephyrin. Looks like they're not done. Neither am I. 2 days had passed since the motion alert caught Thane at the back of my cabin. I hadn't heard from him since, and honestly, I didn't expect to. That kind of silence had become their language, a carefully choreographed absence, masquerading as maturity. I was at the kitchen table, drafting a timeline for Zephyrin, when my phone rang. Solène. "Have you seen Azura's new post?" she asked without a hello. I tilted my head, eyebrows furrowed. "No. Should I brace myself?" "She's at the airport, boarding a flight to Paris." My stomach sank. She tagged the cabin as her safe space to reset before my healing journey, and the caption says, "Get this. Self-love is the first step to healing, thanks to the ones who made this possible." I didn't respond right away. I was staring at the wood grain of my table like it had betrayed me too. "She's thanking the people who stole from me," I finally muttered. "She's thanking you, whether she realizes it or not," Solène replied. I pulled up Azura's Instagram. There she was. Designer luggage, first-class lounge, hashtags like self-healing and thankful, and all of it paid for by a woman sleeping with legal documents next to her bed like a pistol. I've spent the past week checking door locks twice a night. Meanwhile, she's sipping champagne over the Atlantic, I said. They said she needed space to recover. Turns out, she needed a passport and my name. That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep. My mind wouldn't stop. At 3:17 a.m., I opened my laptop and emailed Zephyrin. The next morning, she replied. The subject line was cold, surgical. Findings, credit access misuse. Her report was even colder. 3 luxury purchases from Nordstrom, 2 round-trip tickets to Paris and London, all billed to credit lines tied to my name. Accounts I hadn't touched in years, still linked to the refinancing help I'd once given my parents. One of the accounts listed Morvena as an authorized manager. They hadn't just taken from me, they'd weaponized my financial credibility like it was their inheritance. I printed the report out on thick white paper. Each transaction line felt like a scar being outlined. $1,765. Designer handbag, $4,298. Round-trip airfare to Charles de Gaulle, $989. Boutique spa reservation in Provence. I taped each page to the living room wall. I stood back and stared at them like they were clues in a murder investigation. They weren't just robbing me, I whispered. They were rewriting what daughter meant. That afternoon, I canceled every credit line not under my full control. I changed every password, froze my credit. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was reclaiming. And with each cancellation, I felt the fog clear just a little more. No more wondering if this was a mistake. No more hoping someone would say sorry. They weren't sorry. They were calculating. And I had been complicit, too trusting, too silent, too accommodating. They dressed up their theft in the language of love, I murmured, sipping my coffee as I stared at the documents. But I speak numbers, and these numbers scream betrayal. Around 6 p.m., an email pinged into my inbox. Zephyrin again. Subject, fraud escalation. Financial Crimes Division, notified. I've looped in the fraud division. This might be bigger than civil court. I stared at the message for a long moment, letting the weight of it sink in. I walked over to the calendar on my fridge and traced my finger along the days. I circled the following Tuesday. Let's see how Morvena handles federal paperwork. The courthouse smelled like old paper and industrial-strength floor wax. That mix always hit me the same way, like truth and bureaucracy were trying too hard to coexist. I walked in wearing a navy blue pantsuit I hadn't touched since my last job interview. Clutched tightly in my hand was a file folder labeled in bold Sharpie. Fraud. Zephyrin met me at the security line. She looked sharp, composed. I could tell by the way her lips were pressed into a fine line that she wasn't here for negotiation. They're already inside, she said, waiting in the lobby. I followed her up the wide staircase, my heart hammering hard but steady. I'd practiced every possible scenario in my mind, but nothing prepared me for the sight of them sitting together. Thane scrolling through his phone like this was a dentist appointment. Morvena flipping through a lifestyle magazine with exaggerated calm. And Azura, dressed in all white like a grieving widow, legs crossed, face blank. Zephyrine leaned in and whispered, "Let the paper speak louder than emotion today." I nodded once. That was the plan. Inside the courtroom, everything felt hushed yet heavy, like a storm about to break. The judge, an older woman with a gaze that could slice through concrete, called the case. Zephyrine stood with her usual grace, sliding exhibit folders across the table to the bailiff. "Your Honor," she began, "we're presenting evidence of fraudulent property transfer, misuse of a healthcare power of attorney, and financial coercion tied to the property known as Greer Cabin." She moved through the documents like a surgeon, calm, exacting, no wasted words. The judge reviewed silently for a long moment, eyes narrowing as she scanned the notarized documents. "This transfer," she said, lifting a stapled form, "was based on a healthcare POA from a surgical recovery 3 years prior?" "Yes, Your Honor," Zephyrine confirmed. The judge turned to Morvena, who had suddenly stopped smoothing out her skirt. "Did you obtain her consent for this transfer?" Morvena cleared her throat, voice syrupy sweet. "We were only trying to help. Vespera wasn't using the property. Azura was in crisis. We made a family decision." The judge tilted her head. "You made a legal decision using borrowed authority. That's not the same thing." She looked back at Zephyrine. "Based on the submitted documents and statements, this transfer is null and void." There was an audible gasp in the courtroom. Azura's jaw dropped slightly. Thane shifted in his chair. Morvena's lips quivered, just barely. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just sat tall and still. "You weren't helping me," I said calmly. "You were helping yourselves." The judge continued. "The title is restored to Vespera Greer as sole owner, effective immediately." A rustle behind us broke the silence. A man stood from the back row, the man who had tried to buy the cabin. He raised a hand and approached the witness podium with a nervous glance toward the judge. "I wasn't planning to speak," he said, voice firm, "but I was told by Thane Greer that the daughter didn't want the house, that she had agreed to the sale. I was given verbal assurances of exclusive access and signed approval." He looked down for a moment, then back up. "I didn't want to be involved in family drama, but I'm here because truth matters more." The courtroom was silent again. Morvena tried to salvage the moment. "We thought we had authority." The judge interrupted. "What you had was assumption and access, not consent." Azura sat frozen. No tears. Just math behind her eyes. I saw it, her calculating the loss, the leverage, the image. Zephyrine leaned close and whispered, "They'll lose more than the house today." When court adjourned, I walked out first. Zephyrine followed closely, but I didn't wait for her. I needed air. I needed silence that didn't feel weaponized. Outside, a small group of local reporters had gathered, microphones aimed, cameras blinking. I walked past them. I didn't owe anyone a soundbite. Later that evening, after a long shower and a bottle of sparkling water I didn't finish, I found a padded envelope on my doorstep. No return address. Just my name written in familiar, slanted script. I brought it inside, peeled the flap open slowly. Inside was a will. Older, yellowed slightly at the edges. Signed by my grandfather. My breath caught. He had left the cabin to me, not to the family, not to Azura, not in trust. To me. In the margin, handwritten in fading ink, were 6 words. It was always meant to be yours. The will was older than anything in my possession. Yellowed, handwritten, creased down the middle like it had been folded and tucked into a drawer for years. But what struck me wasn't the signature or the date. It was the sentence scrawled in my grandfather's crooked handwriting in the left margin, for the one who always stood on her own. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope spread out before me, the courthouse decision still echoing in my head. I could hear the judge's voice repeating the words, null and void. But this was louder. This was proof that long before Morvena and Thane tried to strip me of everything, someone else had seen me, valued me, named me as worthy. I called Zephyrine immediately. She picked up on the first ring. "It's not registered in the public archive," I said, "but it's real." "Bring it tomorrow," she replied. "We'll log it into the case history. It might not change the ruling, but it cements motive." They tried to bury this, Vespera. That night, I couldn't sleep. I brewed chamomile, didn't drink it. Walked the cabin 3 times, barefoot, arms crossed. I'd won in court, but winning didn't erase the damage. Winning didn't remove what they'd already taken emotionally, what they thought they had the right to decide on my behalf. The next morning, a thick envelope showed up in my mailbox. No name, no logo, just my address scrawled in bold Sharpie. Inside, folded between legal disclaimers and generic apology statements, was a notice from a collections agency. Apparently, I owed over $6,200 on a credit card I never opened. I scanned the details, opened in my name, 5 years ago, tied to the same address my parents lived at then. Charges labeled home improvement, contractor advance, and one that hit me like a punch to the gut. Retaining wall installation, Greer cabin. Even while I paid their mortgage, they kept another account alive, just in case they needed me again. I sat on the edge of the couch, rereading the bill. I wasn't angry, not in that screaming, throw-a-glass kind of way. I was hollowed out. They'd taken my name, turned it into a credit line, wrapped it in debt, and used it like a tool. And I had let them. A soft knock pulled me from my thoughts. Nancy, my neighbor. She handed me a USB stick. "This might be something you want to see," she said, glancing toward the driveway. "Security camera caught it 2 months ago. Didn't seem important then, but now..." I plugged it in and opened the file. A grainy, wide-angle view of the cabin exterior appeared on screen. The date stamp matched the timeline of the supposed sale. There they were, Thane and Morvena, on the porch, laughing. A real estate agent stood between them, clipboard in hand. Thane gestured toward the property, animated, confident. And then Morvena's voice cut through. "Don't worry, our daughter won't contest. She owes us too much to complain." I watched it 3 times. The laughter, the paperwork, the betrayal dressed in casual conversation. They weren't clumsy. They weren't confused. They were cruel and deliberate. At dusk, I walked outside, the will still in my pocket, and sat at the fire pit. I pulled out a photo. Christmas 2020, the last one I'd taken before they began icing me out. I was cropped out in the version they'd printed and hung in their hallway. This was my original. I lit a match and watched it curl into smoke. This wasn't the loss of a house. This was the death of illusion. Just after dark, my phone buzzed. Zephyrine. "The federal fraud team's taking interest," she said. "They want to schedule interviews. This could open a longer investigation into asset misuse and financial coercion." My grip on the phone tightened. "I didn't need revenge," I told her. "But accountability, that's a language I speak fluently." 3 days after receiving my grandfather's will, I was pouring my first cup of coffee when the phone rang. Unknown number. Arizona area code. I paused just long enough to weigh whether I had the emotional stamina to deal with whoever was on the other end. I picked up. "Ms. Greer?" the voice asked, crisp, professional. "Yes. This is Agent Lawrence from the Office of Financial Crimes. We've reviewed materials sent by your legal counsel regarding property transfer, financial signatures, and potential misuse of fiduciary access. We'd like to invite you for a formal deposition." It didn't feel real, not at first. "Of course," I said. "When?" "Tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll send a confirmation email." I ended the call and immediately dialed Zephyrine. She didn't sound surprised. "They're treating this as a potential long-term fraud case," she confirmed, "which means this is no longer just about property. It's about pattern." I sat down, eyes focused on nothing. "Let's give them everything." Later that afternoon, the phone buzzed again. This time, the name on the screen made my jaw tighten. Morvena. Against better judgment, I answered. Her voice was soft, guilt woven into every syllable. Ves, I just heard about the deposition. Do you understand what you're doing? I stayed silent. Your father. If they decide this was fraud, he could go to prison. My hand clenched around the phone. Did he think about that when he forged my name? He thought he was protecting what we've built. This family, we only did what was best for us. I corrected her. No, you did what was best for yourselves. I am family. You just didn't count me when it mattered. She didn't respond, just silence, then a quiet, I hope one day you'll understand. I hung up. That evening, a storm hit. Wind thrashing against the trees, branches creaking like old bones. I curled up on the couch, not for comfort, but strategy. I opened my laptop and began organizing every folder. Emails, bank statements, audio clips, scanned letters. The paper trail was heavy, and now, finally, it had a destination. The next morning, I received a message from Solène with just one line and a link. Your sister's healing trip just got exposed. I clicked. A wellness influencer's Instagram had posted a side-by-side of Azura's Paris photo shoot and a screenshot of the court records, redacted, but enough to connect the dots. Caption: Not all self-healers are saints. I scrolled the comments. Brutal, honest, unforgiving. Azura's sponsors were already pulling her off campaign boards. Her brand was imploding under the weight of truth. I didn't feel smug. I didn't screenshot anything. I just closed the app and whispered, truth is patient, but it always shows up. The backlash didn't stop there. Thane lost his weekend contract with the Veterans Center. Someone sent the court documents anonymously to his employer. Morvena started a GoFundMe titled, Help Us Save Our Home. It backfired. People posted links to news articles, highlighting their use of my credit. Their page got flooded with comments until it was shut down. In the same inbox where I'd received threats and silence for years, messages now poured in, some hateful, some sympathetic. Strangers, friends of friends, even people who had once known me only as the quiet daughter, reached out to say, I've been there too. I told Solène that night, it's not about winning, it's about not losing myself again. She replied, You didn't lose yourself, Ves. They just thought you'd never stand up. The call ended, and I sat in the quiet for a long time, until my phone lit up again. Voicemail. Private number. I hit play. We have one more thing to discuss. The trust fund. You might want to sit down. That voice. Cold. Matter of fact. Not a threat. A pivot. I stood still in my kitchen, holding the phone in the air as the message ended. Then, calmly, I hit replay. Once. Twice. They never thought I'd get this far. Now they'll wish they stopped me sooner. Sunday morning arrived without fanfare. No court dates, no new legal notices, no headlines. Just the quiet. The kind that used to feel foreign. The kind that now felt like mine. I sat on the porch wrapped in a faded blanket, steam curling from the rim of my mug. Solène had dropped off a fresh batch of herbal tea the night before, something with ginger and chamomile, and told me to finally sit still. She didn't need to say more. She knew. The air held that early autumn chill, where the light still looked warm, but the breeze cut just enough to remind you that something was ending. My laptop chimed from inside, breaking the moment. I stood, stretched slowly, and padded back in. One unread email. Subject line, You made it out. It was from Lyris. You made it out. That matters more than anything. Most don't. Most don't even see it until they've spent years erasing themselves for people who only see them as useful. You made it out, and that's everything. I sat there for a long time, rereading it, not crying, not raging, just letting it settle. I thought back to being 8 years old, hiding under the dining table during one of my parents' silent wars. I remember watching my mother wipe the counters with robotic precision, and my father sit in his recliner like he was on a different planet. I thought then that adults didn't lie, that parents couldn't betray you, but now I knew better. They didn't betray me when I was 36. They started when I was too young to know the difference. There's a quote I came across once that stuck with me, even when I tried to forget it. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. I didn't hate them. Not anymore. I just didn't miss them either. Around noon, Solène called. We talked briefly, mostly about the garden she was trying to keep alive. But then her voice shifted. I ran into someone, she said. You remember Megan? From college? Barely. She knows your family, or knew them. She said they scammed her uncle out of a trust fund. Years ago, before you bought the cabin. The words hit with the quiet devastation of something already known, but not yet spoken aloud. So it wasn't just me. I wasn't unique. I wasn't the black sheep. I was just the next one in line. I wrote Megan's name in my notes, then highlighted it, underlined it twice. Not because I needed more evidence, but because I needed the truth to feel real, tangible, documented. Later that afternoon, I moved the last piece of furniture out of the cabin that had any connection to them. The love seat Morvena gifted me after my first promotion. The side table Thane built during one of his rare bursts of fatherly attention. Gone. I bought a new dining table, just one chair. People might have called it lonely. I called it honest. And I framed a quote to hang in the entryway, above where the old family photo used to be. I didn't walk away from them. I walked back to myself. I stood there, staring at the words like they were the last step in some invisible staircase I'd spent months climbing. Then, just before sunset, a letter arrived in the mailbox. Not a package, not a warning. It was from the county clerk. Request to review Greer Trust documentation. Status accepted. The trust. The one they claimed didn't exist. The one they said had been dissolved. It hadn't been dissolved at all. It had been transferred, quietly, strategically. I stood there on the porch, the letter in my hand, the wind curling through the trees like it already knew. I looked out toward the horizon and whispered, so this wasn't the final chapter after all. The legal archive room inside the county trust office was cold in a way that felt personal, like it didn't want anyone staying longer than they needed to. I sat across from Zephyrin and a trust officer named Meyer, whose gray suit and dry tone felt built for this exact sort of bureaucracy. Zephyrin spoke calmly as she placed the final set of documents on the table. As you'll see, these pages detail unauthorized amendments to the Greer Trust filed under Morvena Greer's signature. You'll also find mismatched dates and digitally lifted copies of Vespera's signature. Meyer scanned the papers without looking up. Then he clicked his pen and said flatly, "The fund should have remained in your name from 2015 onward. There's no legal basis for the transfer." I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I didn't even exhale too loudly. I just sat there and let it sink in. They buried it to build their lie. I unearthed it to rebuild my life. 1 week later, I stood at the front door of my parents' home, holding a single printed page, the refiled trust certification, bearing only my name as the sole beneficiary. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. I rang the bell. Morvena opened the door wearing pearl earrings and a look of artificial grace, the kind she always used when she didn't want the neighbors to overhear something messy. Behind her, I saw Thane on the couch, pretending to read a magazine. Azura stood leaning against the kitchen island, arms folded, lips pressed into a permanent pout. I didn't say a word. I walked in, placed the trust copy on the entry table, and turned to face them. Azura broke the silence first. "You always thought you were better than us," she said, voice thin with venom. I shook my head. "No, I just stopped letting you decide what I was worth." Then I left. I didn't look back. I didn't slam the door. I just walked out like I was finally exiting a room I'd been trapped in my whole life. Back at the cabin, I filed the last legal documents into a new folder, one labeled Finalized. Then I opened a new one called Next. A month passed. I transferred ownership of the cabin into my own LLC. Not for secrecy, not for tax reasons, just to mark it as something no one could ever lay claim to again. And then I did something even bigger. I started a small workshop. 1 room, 5 chairs, a whiteboard, and a coffee station. A space for women like me, women who had been gaslit, drained, silenced by people they called family. I shared my story for the first time to strangers. And when the words felt too sharp to say aloud, I wrote them instead. "You don't owe anyone your silence. I told them, especially not those who cash it like currency. At the end of that first workshop, I picked up the marker and wrote one word in big block letters on the board. Accountable. Spring rolled in with sharp wind and stubborn sunlight. I hosted a quiet open house at the cabin, not for publicity, not for performance, just for peace. Only close friends and community members came, people who had stood by me, not for what I could give, but for who I refused to stop being. That afternoon, I planted a small oak tree near the front porch. A simple plaque rested at its base, planted in truth, watered by fire, grown by choice. Later that evening, as I was cleaning up the last of the paper plates, I found a plain envelope by the door. My name was written in Morvena's familiar script. Inside, one sentence. You were always ungrateful. I didn't flinch. I didn't sigh. I folded the letter in half, walked out back to the fire pit, and tossed it in. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need her understanding. The story didn't end when I got justice. It began when I stopped waiting for their permission to live free.